What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG, live from Twitch, the old Twitch app here, looking at some... Am I a little too turned up for this one? Probably. We're going to look at some Pauper cards today, something that we haven't really talked about in a good long time, but Wizards just dumped a ton of new cards into Pauper thanks to Commander Masters. They downshifted a bunch of stuff. The whole Pauper community is on fire about it right now, and I want to be involved. I've got some massive FOMO because I haven't really talked about Pauper in too long, and it is an awesome format. So I put together a quick little top 10 because there's a bunch. There's so many. I think it was like 60 cards or whatever that they downshifted to common. And a lot of them look pretty relevant, right? But I put together sort of a little pseudo top 10 here that we'll try to get through as quickly as possible. You know, just kind of talk about what cards I think are the best from Commander Masters to look at for the Pauper environment. We'll see if we get this like massive shift like I want, or if it's really not going to mean much in the end. But a few of these cards I do think are like super relevant. So let's start with an honorable mention here. It's going to be Fire Mind Vessel. I had a couple of like choices for honorable mention. I was thinking Generous Gift is pretty good. The 3-mana white thing that blows any permanent up besides land and puts a 3/3 into play. So it's like a white beast within or something. That seemed kind of cool. And then if I wanted to be like a little stinker, I was thinking Crawling Infestation, which is a 3-mana green enchantment. You mill 2 cards a turn, and then whenever something happens in the graveyard, like a creature goes to the graveyard, you get a 1/1, but it only triggers once each turn. I've made some fun like budget decks around that card in the past, but I don't know that it's a good enough engine for Pauper. Although, Pauper can sometimes be a sort of grindy, like card advantage-y sort of format. And I think a card like Crawling Infestation is interesting, but this one is just much more powerful. In my Fire Mind, this is 4 mana for an artifact. ETB's taps for 2 mana of different colors. This didn't quite get there in Standard, although it was in a deck or two back in the day. But Pauper is much different than Standard, and I think that Pauper already has some cards that are probably slightly better than this, but this does fix your mana if you need that in these like multicolored decks. Pauper needs more effects that do that some of the time. And there's like 3-color decks in Pauper that are a little slower, things like Affinity 2 that might decide to play an artifact like this. So I think this has homes in Pauper, but ultimately I'm not like super sure about this card, which is why it's in the honorable mention, right? It's a decent little rampy piece that fixes mana and being able to kind of play, you know, an explosive vegetation in any deck, which is kind of what this feels like, you know, 4 mana, go get 2 lands, throw them into play. Very similar effect. And the fact that any deck can play that now actually kind of seems really good. So, you know, maybe. I think that, somebody in chat has just reminded me, Pauper can be as strong as Modern. Yeah, I totally get that. Pauper's got a lot of very strong cards in it. But I'm pretty sure that it's still like, at the moment, like a fairly grindy format. I know that there's like Tolarian Terror decks that are relatively fast. Affinity, again, is a deck that you have to worry about. There's mono white aggro and stuff. So I know that there are fast decks in Pauper. Don't get me wrong, but I also know there are grindier control decks and stuff that might eye a card like this jealously. So I wanted to bring it up, you know. But let's move on to number 10. This is Rot Shambler. It's basically an unruly mob in green. This is 1 and a green for a 1/1 fungus. Whenever another creature you control dies, it gets a +1/+1 counter. With kind of interesting flavor text. Really greater good in it, aren't you, Riza? But one or the other. I like Unruly Mob, and I really like the idea of a green one. There's a lot more ways, at least in, I think, in this color combination, you know, Golgari or something. There's a lot more ways to sacrifice creatures. Obviously Orzhov could play Unruly Mob, and it hardly ever does. So I guess you got to keep that in mind. But I think this is just an interesting effect in green, considering green does need some help in Pauper. And this is an effect it never had before that's actually kind of proven to be an interesting effect from time to time. So I think this is kind of a neat one, but I'm not sure how strong it is. That's why it's all the way down here at number 10. But it's a cool one to have access to. And that's what I think a lot of these Pauper Downshifts are doing from Commander Masters, is they're just making it a slightly more, you know, enriched, you know, set. A lot of these cards aren't going to change the face of the format, but they're going to be nice options to have from deck to deck. And that's kind of what I like, is I like introducing role players more than just throwing bombs at the format and stuff like that, just throwing spaghetti at the wall and leaving big red marks. I like stuff like this role players, calm a little bit more. But as we move on, we'll see stuff like Reverse Engineer at number 9. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for a sorcery with improvised. You draw 3 cards. So is this playable in Affinity, which is one of the best decks in Pauper? I think I know. It's probably in the top 3 decks in Pauper right now. It has been for a really long time. So is it playable? It's not Thoughtcast or anything, but it's still a pretty good card. And the fact that it has a home basically day one is definitely going to be something to look at. Draw 3, even at sorcery speed, is going to be pretty good a lot of the time. So I'm pretty excited about this one. It's where we start getting into the stuff that I'm a little bit more confident about making these calls with, so I'm pretty excited about this one. I think there's more than just the Affinity deck that can kind of try it out, but definitely the Affinity deck. Meyer Triton is next, at number whatever this is, 8, I believe, something like that. I really liked this card in Standard. Great role player. It's one of those rare cards that works when these like self-mill decks like pretty well, but actually has a decent stat line and a great keyword ability. Death Touch is the perfect ability for a card like this. Not only do you get to stall with the Death Touch and just, block on the ground for nights, for days, and nights for what it's worth, but you also get to gain this 2 life, which further stalls the game a little bit. Just Meyer Triton was a sweet card that I played in a ton of decks, especially budget decks and stuff back in the day when this was around in like Ixalan or something. I forget what this was in. I think it was Ixalan, one of those 2 sets in the Ixalan block. But just a really sweet card that I missed a lot, and I hope that its introduction to Pauper is like worth something. Again, this is more of a role player, but decks that self-mill having this option, I think will actually be kind of an important thing for them. I don't know if it vaults them into playability any more than they already are. There can be fairly playable decks right now, but I think this is a nice little tool for them that they didn't have access to before that I've always really enjoyed. So cool card. Moving on to 7. Can I keep track? It was Ikoria. Perhaps it was. Probably more right than I am. I'm going to Dread Return here. This is 2 and 2 black for a sorcery. Return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Flashback. Sack 3 creatures. So you just get straight up zombified. That's slightly harder to cast. But you can flash it back and not pay any mana, which is ridiculous. Back in the day, this was a really important card in the Bridge from Below deck that would kill on like turn 2, right? Because you just mill yourself to crap, and you get Narcomoebas as you mill, because Narcomoeba says whenever you hit it while you mill, you just get to play it without casting its, paying its casting cost. So you mill yourself and you hit like 3 Narcomoebas, and eventually, Dread Return will end up in your graveyard because you've been milling yourself, right? And then you flash it back, sack 3 dudes because Bridge from Below gives you dudes. And just bring back some enormous dude on like turn 2. Sometimes in that deck, you'd bring back Flamekin Zealot, a card you've never heard of, to give all your creatures +1/+0 and haste until end of turn, and you just swing with all the zombies that Bridge from Below is giving you, and you win on turn 2 because you're usually attacking for like 23 or whatever. It's a sick deck, dude. I really love that deck. One of the first decks, besides like Yawgmoth's Bargain, this one was 10 years later, that like really turned me on to a deck with a lot of moving parts and stuff like that, and I really enjoyed playing that. And Dread Return was a super important piece in that, and I'm hoping that it has a similar place in Pauper, if you can make that work in Pauper. But just the fact that throwing this in your graveyard for free and then flashing it back for free is an option. Really, really important. I'm pretty happy this card's in Pauper now, and I'm also a little bit surprised. Honestly. Really surprised. It was in the Theros set. Yes, it was. Meyer Triton was in the Theros set. You are correct. Zantino. Here's a cookie. I do appreciate the fact check, by the way. I need it from time to time. Cryptic Serpent is up next. I'm not too sure on this one. This is 5 and 2 blue for a 6/5 Serpent. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So we just get another Tolarian Terror in Pauper that is just worse than Tolarian Terror, but people already play Tolarian Terror decks in Pauper. So are we just going to use this as copies 5 through 8 or copies 5 through 6, right, of Tolarian Terror? Is it worth doing that in the deck? I'm not 100% clear on that. I think the blue-black, Tolarian Terror decks already have the guy that has Delve. It's a black creature, it's a 5/5, and it has Delve. Really important Pauper creature forever, and now I'm blanking on the name of it. Someone will remind me. But anyway, it'll be on screen during the YouTube video. That's the benefit of doing YouTube videos. But in any case, Gurmag Angler, boom! I knew someone would tell me in chat. Thank you. It is Gurmag Angler. But yeah, you can play 8 Serpent or 12 Serpent if you want to play Angler as well, right? Then I don't know how much room you have for instants and sorceries, but it might be a cool little deck to try. So I think this probably at least goes in for a few weeks, and we'll see how good it is in the Tolarian Terror, like existing Tolarian Terror deck that's already one of the top 5 decks in Pauper. But it might not quite hack it. I mean, it's not Haughty Jin. Downshift Haughty Jin, we'll get to talking, but this isn't quite there. But it is still a big dude that you can get really, really early in the game. So I think it's worth trying out. But we'll move on to number 5. Yes, number 5. It's Mirrorsmith. I've never been quite sure how to pronounce this word in Magic lore. But Mirrorsmith is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/1 human artificer. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. So just a really sweet card. I'm not sure if this is good enough for Affinity, but it does sort of open up some other artifact strategies, perhaps, in Pauper that I think are really cool. Again, this can be sometimes a grindy kind of card advantage-y format. I know decks like Burn and Affinity kind of put a cap on how grindy you can get, but there are going to be long games, and this is a nice little card in long games, and the Affinity deck can abuse this. I'm not saying it doesn't go in Affinity. It's already, I think, Jeskai. So it's a non-artifact card they got to find a slot for, but I could see a one of Mirrorsmith in Affinity. It's got to be Mirror, right? Mirrorsmith in Affinity. And on the games that you get it, it's just going to, kind of be a third path Iconoclast or something like that. On your Affinity turns where you're casting spells for effectively free and completely free other times. And this is a way to use your mana and fill the board with like 2 or 3 other things. So I think that this is probably at least important, maybe. In Affinity is kind of a silver bullet, and maybe even a 4-of for all I know. But again, it opens up other strategies that I'm kind of interested in. So let's move on to number 4, which is Sulfurous Blast. 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for an instant that deals 2 damage to each creature in each player. If you cast this spell during your main phase, Blast deals 3 damage to each creature in each player instead. So an instant speed wrath effect in red, which we don't get a whole lot of at common, right? We get earthquake effects and stuff like that. Anger of the Gods, we get those at rare and uncommon occasionally, but very, very rare to see these at common, if you'll pardon the pun. So this might be somewhat cool, not only at instant speed as a 2 damage sweep, but the fact that this is a 4 mana, 3 damage to everything kind of sweeper during your main phase. Also super relevant against a ton of decks. They're just not all that many actually decent, not like feel bad sweepers in Pauper, to the best of my knowledge. I know there are a few decent sweeps, but I think this will join the list of decent sweeps in Pauper and definitely be worth a look at. So really cool. Oh, wow, this is nice. Yeah, this is pretty neat, actually, and opens up some avenues. You would expect not the first, but a decent Pauper sweeper to be white or black or something, but this opens up some avenues in red that I'm not sure we had access to previously. So really sweet pickup here. I'm kind of excited about. But moving on to 3, perhaps, is All That Glitters. If you know me, this card's going to be on the list. We can basically move on here. You know what this does. All That Glitters is 1 and a white for an enchantment. It's an aura that enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control, so it always gets at least +1/+1. Put it on an enchantment creature, it gets +2/+2. If you go off, it gets +40/+40. That's the thing you want to do with All That Glitters. Just a sweet card to introduce to any sort of, build a battleship or Bogle's decks or Enchantress decks that are in Pauper right now. Just an awesome card to have access to. All That Glitters. Just, this is actually my favorite new Pauper Downshift, but I have to kind of contain myself and not make it number 1. But if this were just a list of my favorite new downshifts, like this would be the one. But I'm trying to remain objective. You guys know how much I love this card. I've played it a billion times. I talk about it to this day. I'm in love with this card. So just give me this one, right? Number 2, though, is the Snipe. Gutta Snipe is finally a common. It feels like it should have been a common this whole time. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So Pauper Burn. I know for a fact is a deck. What I don't know is whether or not it actually wants this card. That's why it's number 2. It's kind of, that's holding it back. Is I'm not actually totally convinced that this is good enough for the Pauper burn deck. And I say that as a guy who for the last 8 entries has been like, Pauper's a slow, grindy format. And it's, honestly, when you look at the burn deck, there's a lot of, power and speed. Great cards in that deck. And does it fit Gutter Snipe? Is 3 mana too much? Is the 2 toughness too small for this format, right? There's a lot of removal that hits this. So I'm not actually like super convinced, but if you're a Pauper burn player and you're excited to play Gutter Snipe, I am totally on your side. I want to see how it works. It's going to be really, really fun. If you only get like 1 or 2 pops worth of value off of this, I think it's probably worth your time. But 3 mana is a deceptive amount in Pauper burn, so it'll have to be worth your time, and I'm not sure that it is, but I can't wait. Can't wait to see. Can't wait to see if it is, because really sweet card to introduce to Pauper. Probably the most hype one in terms of like, how excited people are for it. And again, I get that. Makes perfect sense to me, man. It's a great card. We'll move on to number 1. You probably called it. This is a lot of people's number 1, I think. It's Murmuring Mystic. Perhaps especially now that it's a common, the best common level like spells matter card it's like ever been printed. 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 1/5 human wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. To me, this is probably better than Gutter Snipe. Probably better than Mirrorsmith. It's kind of an amalgamation of both of them when you think about it. But 4 mana for the 1/5 stat line. Can't be bolted. Can't be killed by like 4 damage removal, which is kind of important. Can't be cut down. I like that, even though I don't think that's a factor in Pauper. But one way or the other, there's a lot of removal that's kind of dodges, which is nice. It needs to. It can also block like somewhat well. And if you just are able to fire off couple instants and sorceries, maybe if you play it with the mana to back it up with the counterspell, then we can get cooking, like get like 3, 4, 5 birds out, get to swinging every turn. It only takes a couple of turns to take somebody out. Some of my favorite budget decks of all time back in the day were when Murmuring Mystic was in standard, because it can really do some work, man. It's an unassuming card, but it's such a sweet magic card, dude. So I think it might have work to do in Pauper. You could argue it's a step too slow, and I think that would be an argument you could make strongly and convincingly, but I at least want to try this thing out again. Super important spells matter card here. And yeah, 4 mana seems like a lot, but once it's out, man, this is a great way to just straight up win the game, dude. So really excited to see if this can make the cut in Pauper. I think a lot of other cards that we've looked at almost certainly do make the cut. Not all, but there's an argument for a lot of these cards. But I feel like if Murmuring Mystic has an impact, it'll have a pretty big impact. So really betting on this card. I've always liked it, and I hope that it finally finds its like real home in Pauper. Some people play this card in EDH, but ever since it left standard, it really hasn't had like a place outside of like historic brawl from time to time. You see it. So I would really like if it could cement itself as a powerful card in a real format. And Pauper is a real format. So here's to you, Mystic. I hope that you can do it, man. I believe in you, Birdman. I really do. But that is my top 10. That was a quick one. I'm a professional. That's my top 10 new Pauper Downshifts from Commander Masters. I'll leave a link to all of the new downshifted stuff if you want to check it out. In case I missed something, I very likely did. Maybe chat's trying to tell me right now. Could be. But one way or the other, these are the ones that caught my eye. And I hope you enjoyed it. Again, tell me in the comments section. Remember Twitch chat. This is a YouTube video right now. So tell me in the comments section if you, again, picked out any like super like Kush nuggets or whatever that I didn't happen to see. That's important to me. I want to know your takes. But aside from that, just do all the stuff. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Lots of content. Spoiler season coming up. You want to be subbed for that. Cookies and Streams is now following. Don't you want to be like them? They're a cool person. What an awesome name. That is a good name. They're cool. But in any case, do the stuff. Check out the Patreon. Link in the description. Check out the Pokemon channel. Link in the description. I got a lot of stuff going on right now if you haven't noticed. Try to keep up with it. You can. I'm just glad that you're here for this video, So let me know how you felt about everything, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Remember Twitch chat. I'm still going to be here after this. I know it's going to feel weird to not click away after I do the spread love and be kind thing. Be like, hang out with me for a while, Twitch chat. We got to play some games of Brawl. But anyway, I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.